So understanding the frame rate and resolution is going to take you so far in how you develop your videos. It's important to understand how these two things kind of work together and understand how it changes your video and how it looks to your viewer. So traditionally we talked about what you're looking for from your frame rate and your resolution for your video and understanding how your shutter speed works. And I'm going to go over that in a little bit more detail here. So to begin with, remember if you're shooting for film, it's 24 frames a second. And if you're shooting for video, it's 30 frames a second. Now, also taking into account that you want to double your shutter speed in order to make things look normal. So what we have here is we have some videos that I'm going to show you, and we're going to do different shutter speeds to kind of show you what that looks like and why it matters. So remember what I said about doubling the shutter speed in order to make things look normal? So if I was to make the shutter speed higher than double the frame rate, let's say I have a frame rate of 30 frames a second. If I was to go 1/100th of a second or maybe 1/200th of a second, that's so much faster than the recommended doubling. So what happens is that if you do that, the video is going to look a lot more choppy, a lot more punchy, and it's going to be a little bit awkward because it's not going to have the proper amount of motion blur that people are used to seeing in video. Now, if I was to do the inverse and rather than have it at too high of a shutter speed and lowered it to a too low of a shutter speed, what would happen is that it would be way too much blur. It would be almost like you couldn't actually see any detail in the person. It'd be too blurry. And so for people, if people were experiencing that, they'd be like, well, this is way too, it doesn't look right. It looks almost like a dream. And that's actually a great point, because if you were doing maybe a dreamy scene, it might actually make sense to use that type of slower shutter speed. If you were doing something where it's like a sports scene or maybe a boxing match or something like that, and you want it to be punchy, it might be a good time to actually utilize that feature of increasing the recommended shutter speed to represent that kind of like punchiness and that quickness. But like I said before, this is filmmaking. You can do whatever you want, but the traditional kind of way to kind of like judge it is just doubling the shutter speed. You can always guarantee that things will kind of look right. So one really good way to kind of test this out, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, is go out and take some photos. Photography is the best way to understand filmmaking. And so one of the things that you can try to do is have somebody run in front of the camera and do it with a slow shutter speed and see what it looks like. It's probably going to be extremely blurry. Now do the same thing with somebody running quickly with a faster shutter speed, and what you'll notice is that the image gets extremely sharp. It's going to be the exact same thing when you're shooting this video. If you have it at a slower shutter speed, what's going to happen is that it's going to be blurry, and if you have it at a faster shutter speed, it's going to be punchy. But just kind of remember those few components when you're shooting your video and understanding what it's going to look like. And if you have any questions, remember, I'm always here to help.